In the gas-lit exhibition halls of 19th century Europe, thousands flocked not to admire art or witness scientific breakthroughs, but to gawk at a human being displayed like a caged animal. They came to stare, to whisper, to satiate their morbid fascination with a young woman whose only transgression was possessing a body that diverged from European ideals. Sarah Bartman's narrative transcends mere individual tragedy. It serves as a scathing expose of how science, entertainment, and insidious racial biases can converge to obliterate a human life in the most profoundly degrading manner. What befell Sarah Bartman remains one of history's most appalling instances of human exploitation, where a woman's physique was commodified, her inherent humanity erased in pursuit of profit, and specious, scientifically flavored racism. Her story compels us to confront the uncomfortable truths regarding how European society rationalized the dehumanization of black bodies under the pretense of scientific inquiry and public amusement. This is not simply a historical anecdote, it is a raw, unhealed wound in our collective consciousness, a stark reminder of how effortlessly human dignity can be eroded when prejudice intertwines with opportunity. The nascent 1800s witnessed the apogee of European colonialism, accompanied by an insatiable hunger for the exotic and the so-called primitive. Scientific racism gained intellectual legitimacy, with esteemed scholars endeavoring to categorize humanity into hierarchical strata, conveniently positioning white Europeans at the zenith of civilization. This was an epoch when human zoos were deemed educational, when indigenous populations were abducted and paraded as curiosities, and when the boundary between scientific pursuit and theatrical spectacle had virtually vanished. Within this toxic milieu, Africa was perceived not as a continent of diverse cultures and ancient civilizations, but as an untamed wilderness inhabited by beings occupying a nebulous space between human and animal. The Khoi people of South Africa, distinguished by their unique physical attributes, became particular objects of scrutiny for both European anthropologists and opportunistic showmen. Their ancestral way of life, their intricate language, their very physical forms were all transformed into fodder for a European populace eager for validation of their own perceived superiority. Cape Town in the early 1800s was a crucible of colliding cultures, where Dutch colonizers had established a foothold that would ultimately metastasize into the systemic oppression of apartheid. For the Khoikhoi people, European arrival signified the devastation of their ancestral lands, the decimation of their population through introduced diseases and brutal violence, and the reduction of once proud communities to a state of subjugation. It was within this oppressive landscape that Sarah Bartman, originally named Sacha, was born into a world poised to devour her. The practice of displaying human beings for entertainment was not novel, but the 19th century witnessed its escalation to an industrial scale. Freak shows, ethnographic exhibitions, and human zoos burgeoned in popularity across Europe and the Americas. These displays served a dual function. They entertained the masses while simultaneously reinforcing the racial hierarchies that provided justification for colonialism and the institution of slavery. The paying public could observe these specimens, secure in the knowledge that they were witnessing their own evolutionary and moral ascendancy. What rendered these exhibitions particularly insidious was their veneer of scientific legitimacy. Anthropologists and naturalists were frequently present, meticulously taking measurements, recording observations, and publishing scholarly papers that transmuted racist voyeurism into respectable academic discourse. This pseudoscientific framework offered moral absolution for what was essentially human trafficking and unbridled exploitation. Universities, museums, and esteemed learned societies all participated in this dehumanizing enterprise, lending their institutional gravitas to practices we now unequivocally recognize as abhorrent. Sarah Bartman was born around 1789 in the Gamtoos Valley of South Africa's Eastern Cape Province. Her early life among the Khoikhoi was irrevocably shattered by the pervasive violence of colonialism. Her father perished in a commando raid, a component of the ongoing campaign orchestrated by Dutch colonizers to seize Khoikhoi lands and cattle. Like countless Khoikhoi women of her generation, she was forced into servitude, laboring for a Dutch farmer named Peter Caesars near Cape Town. It was here that her destiny would take its most tragic and irreversible turn. The precise circumstances surrounding Sarah's departure from South Africa remain shrouded in ambiguity and dispute, but what is undeniable is that she was persuaded, possibly coerced, by Hendrik Caesars, potentially a relative of her employer and a British ship's surgeon named Alexander Dunlop, to embark on a journey to England. They enticed her with promises of wealth and fame as a performer, painting a vivid portrait of opportunity that must have appeared as a means of escape from her life of servitude. Whether she genuinely consented or was subjected to coercion, given the profound power imbalances inherent in the situation, remains a painful and haunting question that continues to plague her story. The physical trait that would ultimately seal Sarah's tragic fate was steatophagia, a genetic characteristic prevalent among Khoikhoi women involving the accumulation of significant amounts of fat on the buttocks. To European eyes, conditioned by their own rigid standards of beauty, this natural variation appeared grotesque and exotic. Coupled with elongated labia, another genetic trait occasionally observed among Khoikhoi women, Sarah's body became a canvas onto which Europeans would project their deepest fears, unbridled desires, and pseudoscientific theories concerning racial difference. Upon her arrival in London in 1810, Sarah was immediately thrust into the spotlight at 225 Piccadilly Street. The exhibition was advertised with the brazenness of a carnival barker. "The Hottentot Venus," they proclaimed, employing a derogatory term for the Khoikhoi people, while ironically invoking the name of the goddess of love and beauty. For 2 shillings, Londoners could enter a room where Sarah stood on a raised platform, adorned in tight, flesh-colored garments meticulously designed to accentuate her figure while ostensibly maintaining a fade of decency. The spectacle was meticulously choreographed to maximize both profit and public humiliation. Sarah was instructed to parade back and forth, to rotate her body so that viewers could scrutinize her from every conceivable angle, and to permit the more audacious among them to prod and poke her body as if she were livestock at a market. She was compelled to embody the persona of the savage, sometimes appearing in traditional attire, occasionally adorned with face paint and beads, perpetually performing a caricature of Africanness intended to titillate her white audience and reassure them of their own inherent civility. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of the horror of these exhibitions in stark detail. Spectators would brazenly reach out to touch her, particularly her buttocks, treating her body as if it were public property. She was forced to dance, to sing in her native tongue, not as an expression of her rich cultural heritage, but as purported evidence of her primitive nature. The shows frequently incorporated commentary from her handlers, who expounded upon her supposed abnormalities and speculated about her position in the great chain of being that supposedly separated civilized Europeans from their barbaric inferiors. The London exhibitions ignited controversy, even by the lenient standards of the era. Abolitionist organizations already engaged in the struggle against slavery recognized these exhibitions as yet another manifestation of human bondage. The African Association initiated a court case, arguing that Sarah was being held against her will and subjected to indecent treatment. The case hinged on the question of whether Sarah was participating voluntarily, a cruel irony considering that a black woman in 1810 London possessed virtually no genuine choices or legal recourse. During the court proceedings, Sarah was coached to assert that she was a willing participant, that she was earning money, and that she was free to depart whenever she desired. The court, perhaps eager to avoid confronting the deeper and more unsettling implications of the case, accepted this testimony at face value. The shows continued, albeit with minor modifications intended to circumvent accusations of indecency. Sarah's fate was irrevocably sealed. The legal system had absolved itself of any responsibility, characterizing her exploitation as a matter of personal choice rather than systemic abuse. Following the London controversy, Sarah's handlers resolved to seek more receptive audiences. In 1814, she was transported to Paris, the self-proclaimed capital of culture and enlightenment. If London had been merciless, Paris would prove to be utterly unforgiving. Here, she fell into the clutches of Roe, a showman who specialized in exhibiting animals, who callously displayed her alongside trained bears and other exotic creatures, rendering the dehumanization both complete and explicitly literal. In Paris, the spectacle descended to unprecedented depths of degradation. Sarah was displayed nearly nude, forced to wear only a small apron that offered scant coverage of her genitals. The French public, even more enthusiastic than their British counterparts, thronged to witness the Hottentot Venus. She was compelled to perform in opulent salons and squalid sideshows alike, her body scrutinized by everyone from inquisitive aristocrats to esteemed academicians who perceived in her a validation of their deeply ingrained theories regarding racial hierarchy. The Parisian exhibitions attracted the attention of Georges Cuvier, one of France's most prominent naturalists and a founder of comparative anatomy. Cuvier and his colleagues regarded Sarah not as a human being deserving of dignity and respect, but as a scientific specimen that could potentially substantiate their preconceived theories regarding racial differences. They subjected her to extensive and intrusive examinations while she was still alive, meticulously taking detailed measurements, creating anatomical sketches, and recording observations that reduced her to a mere collection of anatomical curiosities. The physical toll exacted by constant exhibition, coupled with the profound psychological trauma of her inhumane treatment, began to erode Sarah's health. She increasingly turned to alcohol, perhaps the only available means of escape from her relentless daily humiliation. Contemporary accounts describe her as becoming withdrawn and listless, her performances mechanical and devoid of emotion, the light in her eyes gradually dimming as she came to the agonizing realization that there would be no escape from her captivity, no return to her beloved homeland, and no cessation of the daily degradation she was forced to endure. By late 1815, Sarah's health had deteriorated precipitously. Years of unrelenting exploitation, deplorable living conditions, and alcohol dependency had ravaged her body. She succumbed to death on December 29, 1815, at approximately 26 years of age, though her precise age, like so much of her life, was never accurately recorded by those who profited from her suffering. The official cause of death was attributed to inflammatory and eruptive disease, possibly pneumonia or tuberculosis, although the undeniable truth is that she perished from the profound cruelty of Europe. Even death failed to bestow dignity or peace upon Sarah Bartman. Within hours of her passing, Cuvier claimed her body in the name of scientific progress. He conducted a meticulous autopsy, focusing particular attention on those aspects of her anatomy that had been relentlessly sexualized and exoticized during her life. He removed her brain and genitals, preserving them in jars of formaldehyde. He commissioned a plaster cast of her body and had her skeleton prepared for permanent display. Every violation she had endured in life was perpetuated and amplified after her death. Cuvier's subsequent report to the French Academy of Sciences represents one of the most shameful and reprehensible documents in the annals of anthropological history. He described Sarah's anatomy in meticulous detail, drawing comparisons between her physical features and those of apes, and suggesting that she represented a missing link between animals and humans. He devoted particular attention to her genitalia, describing them with a prurient level of detail that revealed far more about European sexual obsessions than any semblance of scientific truth. His conclusions served to reinforce every conceivable racist stereotype, providing pseudoscientific justification for the continued oppression and subjugation of African peoples. The preservation and public display of Sarah's remains became a source of national pride for the French scientific establishment. Her skeleton was meticulously mounted and prominently displayed at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, where it remained on public view until 1974. Her brain and genitals, suspended in their jars of formaldehyde, became objects of study for successive generations of anthropologists, each viewing, each examination, each scholarly paper perpetuating the cycle of exploitation that had commenced in London and Paris, transforming a woman into an object lesson in European racism. For over 150 years, Sarah Bartman's remains were considered the property of the French state, exhibited as scientific curiosities that purportedly demonstrated the inherent inferiority of Africans. Generations of museum visitors gazed upon her bones, reading plaques that described her as a specimen of the Hottentot race. Her preserved organs were studied by scientists who perpetuated the same discredited racial theories that had justified her exploitation. She had become in death what her exploiters had sought to make her in life, a thing rather than a person. The repercussions of Sarah's story resonated far beyond her individual tragedy. The manner in which she was displayed and discussed established a precedent for how black women's bodies would be perceived in Western culture as exotic, hypersexualized, and available for consumption. The stereotypes reinforced by her exhibition influenced everything from colonial policy to contemporary pornography, inflicting lasting damage on how black women are perceived and treated. The scientific racism validated by Cuvier's study of Sarah's body proved instrumental in rationalizing colonialism, slavery, and later, the abhorrent system of apartheid. The notion that African bodies were fundamentally different, more primitive, and less human provided intellectual cover for centuries of systematic exploitation. Every measurement Cuvier recorded, every conclusion he reached, became ammunition for those who sought to perpetuate racial hierarchies. Sarah's body had been transformed into a weapon deployed against her own people. The movement to repatriate Sarah Bartman's remains to South Africa gained momentum in the 1980s as the anti-apartheid movement gained international support. South African activists, scholars, and poets began to reclaim her story, transforming her from a symbol of exploitation into an icon of resistance. They demanded the return of her remains, arguing that her continued display in Paris constituted an ongoing act of colonial violence. The French scientific establishment initially resisted these demands, asserting that Sarah's remains were invaluable scientific artifacts that belonged to all of humanity. This assertion, that a woman's stolen body could be considered universal property, revealed how little had changed in the underlying attitudes that had facilitated her exploitation. It required years of sustained diplomatic pressure, persistent public campaigns, and the eventual dismantling of apartheid before France finally acceded to the repatriation of Sarah's remains. In 2002, nearly 200 years after her death, Sarah Bartman finally returned home. The South African government organized a state funeral attended by thousands who gathered to honor a woman who had become a symbol of all those violated by colonialism and systemic racism. She was laid to rest in the Eastern Cape near her birthplace in a solemn ceremony that sought to restore the dignity that had been stolen from her in life and death. The legacy of Sarah Bartman's exploitation continues to echo through contemporary culture. The hypersexualization of black women's bodies, the reduction of African physical traits to exotic curiosities, and the utilization of pseudoscience to rationalize racism, all these modern phenomena are rooted in the treatment she endured. Her story serves as a chilling warning regarding how readily human dignity can be discarded when profit and prejudice converge. Contemporary scholars have dedicated themselves to reclaiming Sarah's story, moving beyond the narrative of victimization to explore the limited details we possess of her as a person. Some have uncovered instances of her resistance, moments when she refused to perform, times when she asserted her humanity in the face of dehumanizing circumstances. These fragments serve as a poignant reminder that she was never merely a victim, but a resilient woman who maintained her dignity in impossibly challenging circumstances. The struggle to bring Sarah home also fundamentally altered how museums and scientific institutions approach the issue of human remains. Her case established critical precedents regarding the ownership of bodies, the ethical considerations of display, and the rights of indigenous populations to reclaim their ancestors. Museums worldwide have been compelled to confront their own collections of human remains, many of which were obtained under similarly exploitative circumstances. Educational curricula in South Africa and beyond now incorporate Sarah Bartman's story as a crucial lesson in colonial history and human rights. Her experience vividly illustrates the intersection of racism, sexism, and scientific exploitation in ways that remain painfully relevant. Students studying her story grapple with complex questions of consent, dignity, and the ways in which knowledge itself can be weaponized as a tool of oppression. The commodification of Sarah's body foreshadowed modern forms of exploitation, ranging from human trafficking to the pervasive pornographic objectification of women of color. The same dynamics that permitted 19th century Europeans to display her for profit persist in different forms today. Her story underscores that the fight for human dignity is an ongoing struggle, that the forces that destroyed her life have not vanished, but have merely undergone transformation. Artists, writers, and performers have discovered in Sarah's story a potent source of inspiration and righteous anger. They have produced works that imagine her inner life, that give voice to her silence, that transform her from an object back into a subject. These creative responses accomplish what her exploiters were incapable of achieving. They recognize her as fully human, complete with dreams, fears, and desires that existed beyond the cruel gaze of her captors. The academic community has been compelled to confront its own complicity in Sarah's exploitation. Anthropology as a discipline has undergone profound self-examination, acknowledging how its founding figures, such as Cuvier, wielded their authority to justify racism. Contemporary anthropologists are dedicated to undoing this historical damage, developing ethical frameworks that prioritize the dignity and agency of the people they study. Sarah Bartman's burial site has evolved into a place of pilgrimage where people gather to pay their respects and reflect on the brutal history she embodies. The unadorned grave stands in stark contrast to the elaborate displays that once housed her remains in Paris. Here, finally, she rests not as the Hottentot Venus, but as Sacha, a woman of the Khoikhoi people who deserved so much more from the world. Contemporary discussions surrounding Sarah Bartman often center on questions of representation and voice. Who possesses the right to tell her story? How do we honor her memory without perpetuating the exploitation she endured? These are complex questions that defy easy answers, but they compel us to consider how we engage with histories of trauma and resistance. The return of Sarah's remains ignited broader movements for repatriation across the former colonial world. Indigenous communities from Australia to the Americas have cited her case as a precedent for reclaiming ancestors held in Western museums. Her homecoming became a symbol of decolonization, of reclaiming what was stolen, of asserting that certain things should never have been treated as mere property. International law has evolved, in part, as a consequence of cases like Sarah's. New frameworks governing the treatment of human remains, the rights of indigenous populations, and the ethics of scientific research all bear the indelible imprint of her story. While these protections were enacted too late to benefit her, they offer hope that future generations may be spared similar violations. The digital age has presented new challenges in how Sarah's story is shared and understood. Online images from her exploitation can be disseminated without context, potentially perpetuating the harm inflicted upon her. Educators and activists are working diligently to ensure that her story is told responsibly, in ways that honor her humanity rather than sensationalizing her suffering. Museums that once displayed human remains as curiosities have transformed their practices, developing innovative methods to educate without exploiting. The empty display cases that once held Sarah's remains serve as powerful reminders of absence, of what was stolen and what has been returned. These spaces invite contemplation on the violence of collection and display, and on the profound human cost of European Enlightenment. Some scholars contend that Sarah Bartman's story reveals the inherent violence at the very core of modernity. The same impulses that fueled scientific progress also enabled her exploitation. The rationality that Europe so prized was employed to rationalize the most irrational forms of cruelty. Her body became a text upon which the inherent contradictions of European civilization were etched. The question of reparations for historical injustices, such as those endured by Sarah Bartman, remains a contentious issue. How do we quantify the debt owed for a stolen life, for generations of trauma, and for the enduring effects of scientific racism? While financial compensation alone cannot heal these deep wounds, the discussion forces us to confront the tangible legacies of exploitation. Sarah's story has become an integral part of larger narratives concerning African feminism and the specific ways in which Black women have been targeted by intersecting systems of oppression. Scholars and activists utilize her experience to shed light on ongoing struggles, demonstrating how the forces that destroyed her continue to operate in altered forms today. The transformation of Sarah from person to specimen to symbol encapsulates the violence inherent in categorization itself. Each label applied to her Hottentot Venus, specimen, further eroded her humanity. Comprehending this process enables us to recognize how language itself can function as a tool of oppression and how the words we employ shape the realities we create. Memorialization efforts dedicated to Sarah Bartman continue to evolve beyond her gravesite. There are calls for museums, educational centers, and public art installations that would honor her memory and educate future generations. These projects grapple with the challenge of remembering without reproducing the exploitation and of disseminating her story without transforming her into a spectacle once more. The scientific data collected from Sarah's body, the measurements, observations, and conclusions still exists in archives and libraries around the world. Scholars debate what to do with this information, destroy it as the fruit of a poisoned tree, or preserve it as evidence of science's capacity for evil. The question underscores how the past continues to impose ethical demands on the present. Contemporary artists engaging with Sarah's story frequently focus on imagining her inner life, the thoughts and emotions her captors never bothered to record. These speculative works offer a form of justice, asserting her full humanity in ways that historical records cannot. They remind us that she was always more than what was done to her. The tourism industry in South Africa has had to contend with how to incorporate Sarah's story into its narratives. Her gravesite attracts visitors from across the globe, raising questions regarding the ethics of dark tourism and the commodification of historical trauma. Local communities are working to ensure that any economic benefits derived from this interest accrue to them, rather than to external exploiters. Legal scholars cite Sarah's case when discussing bodily autonomy and the rights of marginalized populations. Her inability to provide genuine consent, given the power structures arrayed against her, illuminates ongoing debates concerning agency, choice, and coercion. Her story has become a touchstone for understanding how apparent consent can mask deeper forms of exploitation. The role of complicit institutions, ranging from the courts that ruled that her participation was voluntary to the museums that displayed her remains, reveals how systemic oppression operates. No singular villain destroyed Sarah Bartman, rather entire systems conspired to facilitate her exploitation. This understanding is crucial for recognizing and dismantling similar systems today. Psychological studies have explored the trauma inflicted not only on Sarah, but on all those forced to witness or participate in her degradation. The damage caused by reducing human beings to mere objects extends beyond the immediate victims, poisoning entire societies and cultures. Healing from this trauma necessitates acknowledging its depth and persistence. The economic structures that profited from Sarah's display, from ticket sales to academic careers built on the study of her remains, illustrate capitalism's role in human exploitation. Her body generated wealth for everyone except herself, a dynamic that persists in various forms today. Understanding these economic incentives is crucial for preventing future exploitation. Religious and spiritual leaders have found in Sarah's story profound questions concerning human dignity and divine justice. How could a purportedly Christian society perpetrate such atrocities? What does it signify to restore sacred dignity to someone so comprehensively violated? These theological reflections add another layer to ongoing efforts to honor her memory. The international scope of Sarah's exploitation, from South Africa to London to Paris, reveals how racism operates across borders. Her story cannot be confined within any single national narrative, but speaks to the global nature of white supremacy and colonial violence. This transnational element renders her relevant to struggles for justice worldwide. Contemporary forensic anthropologists have been compelled to confront their discipline's origins in the kind of racist pseudoscience practiced on Sarah's body. New ethical frameworks emphasize consent, collaboration with descendant communities, and the recognition that human remains are not merely data, but ancestors deserving of respect. The silence in historical records regarding Sarah's own words and thoughts speaks volumes about whose voices are preserved and whose are erased. Historians striving to reconstruct her life must grapple with archives that meticulously recorded every detail of her body, but almost nothing of her mind. This archival violence continues to shape which stories can be told. Educational initiatives utilizing Sarah's story confront the challenge of teaching about historical trauma without re-traumatizing students, particularly Black women who may see themselves reflected in her experience. Pedagogical approaches emphasize critical thinking, emotional support, and the connection between historical and contemporary injustices. The question of who owns history, who is entitled to tell it, interpret it, and profit from it remains central to discussions concerning Sarah Bartman. Her story has been claimed by various groups for diverse purposes, raising critical questions regarding cultural property and the politics of memory. Environmental historians have connected Sarah's story to broader patterns of extraction and exploitation. Just as her body was mined for profit and knowledge, so too were African lands and resources plundered by the same colonial powers. This ecological dimension adds another layer to understanding the comprehensive nature of colonial violence. The rise of social media has created new platforms for sharing Sarah's story, but also new risks of exploitation. Viral posts about her can spread awareness, but also inadvertently reproduce the spectacle of her suffering. Digital activists are working to ensure that her story is shared in ways that educate rather than sensationalize. Comparative studies juxtapose Sarah's experience with other instances of human exhibition, ranging from P.T. Barnum's freak shows to contemporary reality television. These comparisons reveal both what was unique about her exploitation and what patterns persist in how marginalized bodies are consumed for entertainment. The field of museum studies has been transformed by cases like Sarah's, leading to the development of new best practices for handling sensitive materials and histories. Her legacy endures in every institution that now approaches its displays with greater sensitivity, thinking more critically about whose stories are told and whose dignity is preserved. Literary scholars analyze how Sarah's story has been told and retold, examining the narrative strategies employed to either humanize or objectify her. These studies reveal how storytelling itself can be an instrument of justice or injustice, depending on who controls the narrative and to what ends. The ongoing struggle for racial justice finds in Sarah's story both inspiration and a cautionary tale. Her experience demonstrates how far racism can extend when left unchecked, but her eventual homecoming also illustrates that justice, however delayed, remains within reach. She has become a symbol of both profound suffering and unwavering resistance. Medical ethics courses now often include Sarah's case as a stark example of how medical and scientific authority can be abused. Her story assists future healthcare providers in understanding the paramount importance of consent, dignity, and cultural sensitivity. It serves as a cautionary narrative concerning what occurs when healing professions are transformed into instruments of harm. The concept of restorative justice has been applied to Sarah's case, prompting us to consider what it would truly signify to repair the damage inflicted upon her and her people. While she cannot be brought back to life, efforts to honor her memory, educate about her experience, and prevent similar exploitation offer a form of collective healing. International human rights frameworks now recognize many of the violations Sarah suffered as crimes against humanity. Her story contributed to the establishment of principles concerning human dignity that, although implemented too late for her, safeguard others from analogous treatment. She has become posthumously a guardian of human rights. The courage exhibited by those who fought to bring Sarah home, from South African activists to sympathetic French officials, serves as a reminder that justice requires allies across racial and national boundaries. Their endeavors demonstrate how international solidarity can challenge even the most deeply entrenched systems of oppression. Contemporary discussions surrounding artificial intelligence and digital humanities raise new questions concerning Sarah's legacy. As algorithms trained on biased historical data reproduce ancient prejudices in new and insidious forms, her story cautions us concerning how technological progress can perpetuate age-old evils if we are not vigilant. The transformation of grief into purposeful action characterizes much of the response to Sarah's story. Rather than simply lamenting what was done to her, activists and scholars have channeled their outrage into tangible changes in law, policy, and practice. Her suffering has not been in vain, but has sparked genuine and meaningful transformation. Young people studying Sarah Bartman often pose the most challenging questions. How could this have occurred? Why didn't anyone intervene? What would I have done? These questions compel us to examine our own complicity in contemporary systems of oppression and our responsibility to resist them. The botanical metaphors frequently employed in discussing Sarah, how she was plucked from her homeland, displayed like an exotic flower, preserved like a pressed specimen, reveal how colonialism reduced human beings to mere natural resources. These linguistic choices hold significance, shaping how we comprehend and perpetuate oppression. Disability scholars have explored how Sarah's story intersects with the history of displaying bodily difference as freakish or exotic. Her experience connects to broader patterns of transforming physical variation into spectacle and of denying full humanity to those whose bodies do not conform to narrow and rigid norms. The economics of memory, who profits from historical tourism, who owns the rights to stories of trauma, remains contentious in Sarah's case, ensuring that any benefits derived from sharing her story flow to appropriate communities rather than to exploiters requires unwavering vigilance. Climate change threatens the very landscape where Sarah was born and buried, adding another layer of urgency to preserving her memory. Environmental destruction perpetuates the colonial project of erasing indigenous connections to land, rendering the struggle for climate justice inseparable from the struggle for human dignity. The radical act of uttering Sarah Bartman's given name, Sacha, represents a small but significant act of resistance. Each instance in which we refuse to employ the name her captors bestowed upon her, we resist participating in her objectification. Choosing to remember her by her own name affirms her inherent personhood. Universities that once disseminated the racist theories used to rationalize Sarah's exploitation now offer courses that examine how the production of knowledge can be co-opted to serve oppression. Her story has evolved into a lens through which students learn to critically examine not only what they are taught, but how knowledge itself is created and deployed. The apologies that have been offered for Sarah's treatment raise complex questions concerning institutional responsibility and the limitations of symbolic gestures. While acknowledgement holds significance, true justice necessitates tangible change in how institutions function, in who wields power, and in whose stories are privileged. Contemporary DNA studies have definitively refuted the racist theories that Khoikhoi and others promulgated by utilizing Sarah's body. Science itself has repudiated the conclusions drawn from her exploitation, although the damage wrought in the name of those demonstrably false theories continues to linger. The children who visit Sarah's grave often leave flowers, drawings, and heartfelt letters. Their innocent gestures of care stand in stark contrast to the cruelty she experienced at the hands of adults who should have known better. These offerings suggest hope for a future in which such exploitation becomes truly unthinkable. Sarah Bartman's story ultimately compels us to consider what kind of people we aspire to be. Do we participate in systems that reduce human beings to objects for consumption, or do we actively resist them? Do we avert our gaze from exploitation, or do we take decisive action? Her life and death pose these questions with an urgency that time has failed to diminish. The pursuit of justice in Sarah's case extends beyond her repatriation. Each instance in which her story is shared with dignity, each student who learns from her experience, and each institution that modifies its practices represents a small victory against the forces that destroyed her. Her legacy endures in every act of resistance against dehumanization. As we depart from Sarah Bartman's story, we carry with us the weight of history and the responsibility of memory. She was someone's daughter, quite possibly someone's sister or friend, a young woman possessed of hopes and dreams we will never fully know because those who recorded her life were solely preoccupied with her body. The tragedy is not merely what was done to her, but what was erased, the sound of her laughter, the things that brought her joy, the future she might have chosen for herself. Her story stands as an eternal testament against any system that would reduce human beings to something less than fully human. In a world that continues to grapple with the insidious realities of racism, sexism, and the commodification of bodies, Sarah Bartman remains painfully relevant. She reminds us that dignity is non-negotiable, that no scientific curiosity or economic opportunity can ever justify treating human beings as mere objects, and that the wounds of history demand not simply acknowledgement, but active and sustained repair. Perhaps the most chilling dimension of Sarah's story is how commonplace it appeared to those who participated in her exploitation. Respected scientists, cultured aristocrats, and ordinary citizens all perceived nothing wrong with displaying a woman like a caged animal. This banality of evil cautions us to examine our own normalized cruelties, the exploitations we accept as entertainment, and the profound human costs of our consumption today. When we utter Sarah Bartman's name, we perform an act of resurrection. We affirm that she existed, that she mattered, and that what was perpetrated against her was profoundly wrong. We commit to remembering not only her suffering, but her inherent humanity. And in so doing, we pledge to recognize and protect the humanity in everyone, particularly those whom society seeks to reduce to mere spectacle. Her grave in the Eastern Cape is more than a resting place. It is a site of conscience, a place where the earth itself bears witness to what humans are capable of inflicting upon one another and what we must never permit to occur again. Sarah Bartman is finally home now, but her story transcends geographical boundaries, serving as an eternal reminder that injustice anywhere is a threat to humanity everywhere. In the end, Sarah Bartman's life poses a fundamental question to each of us. When you witness a human being treated as less than human, what action will you take? Her ghost haunts every exhibition, every display, every moment in which profit and prejudice conspire against human dignity. She is watching, she is waiting, and she is demanding that we strive to be better. May her memory not only serve as a blessing, but as a catalyst for revolution. May her story inspire not merely sorrow, but decisive action, and may we strive to construct a world where no one's body is ever again transformed into a prison, where no one's humanity is ever again placed up for sale, and where everyone can live and die with the dignity that Sarah Bartman was so cruelly denied. This is the justice she deserves. This is the world her sacrifice compels us to create. So, as we've explored, the story of Sarah Bartman is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of racism, sexism, and the commodification of human life. It's a call to action, urging us to recognize the inherent dignity of every individual and to actively resist any system that seeks to diminish it. It's about remembering her not just as a victim, but as a person denied her basic rights and ensuring such injustice never happens again. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What struck you most about Sarah's story? What questions does it raise for you? Please leave a comment below. Let's keep this important conversation going. And if you found this video insightful, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future explorations of history, justice, and human dignity. Thanks for watching.